Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Passionately Wrong podcast. I'm James Bellerjo. I'm here with my co host, Randall Searles. And today we have Peter Connor as our guest, and we're very happy to have him. Peter, we've talked to you a little bit before we got on about the international audience that we have, and maybe to demonstrate that we all here today are living up to that ideal. Let's just say where we are. I'm 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in South Carolina. Randy, where are you at?
I'm 11 p.m. in Sevilla, Spain.
And I'm 9 a.m. in Sydney, Australia.
So we are literally covering the globe, covering all time zones, probably at various states of alertness and caffeination. But I think you are the one who has to be sharpest today, Peter. We're going to be asking you some questions. Hopefully, you can explain some things. I didn't warn you about this in advance, but of course, I had to put my devil's advocate hat on about a few topics I read in your book, which we're going to be discussing. And if I challenge you on a few questions, it will be for the purpose of helping you dispel the same questions I suspect others will have, and which I suspect you very well have the answers to. Going to make you work a little bit.
Sure.
But to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself. I noticed I've known you for many years. We crossed paths professionally in Switzerland when we were both in-house counsel in senior roles and attending events of the Association of Corporate Counsel together. And I came to know you relatively quickly then as a smart, charming, and personable guy who was already then clearly demonstrating a more broad mindset than most lawyers have. Most lawyers focus on the work that's in front of them. And you were, to my eyes anyway, someone who was thinking like a manager, and I liked it. So we stayed in touch, and it's been fun in the remote way that one does, seeing how people's careers progress. But you didn't just spend years in Switzerland. You have spent time, if I have it correct, in California, in the UK, in Hong Kong, and of course in Australia. Maybe give us the whistle stop tour of where you've had professional or personal experience if you think it's relevant. Where have you been all in the world?
Yeah, thanks, James. And hi, everyone. And Randy. Yes, so I grew up in Australia. I'm a country boy from a place called Wagga Wagga, which is a small country town about halfway between Sydney and Melbourne. And went to university in Sydney, studied law, actually studied law and commerce. You couldn't do a straight law degree then. So maybe that was the start of me thinking a little bit more broadly. Then got a gig with Baker and McKenzie. I was very lucky to join Baker and McKenzie, the international law firm, in their Sydney office. And they were a firm, at least in Sydney, that was a little bit different. They were somewhat entrepreneurial. And so I ended up working with partners there who really got me, without being conscious about it, got me thinking about the business aspects of things. They were very commercial. And from there, I moved to Hong Kong with Baker and McKenzie, which was one of the great life decisions I made, I would have to say. That started me on this path of international work and experiences. So I went to Baker's Hong Kong. This was in the sort of early to mid 80s. And Baker's at that time were the first foreign law firm to be licensed in China. And there's lots of little side stories I could tell you. But for example, we were going to China in the early days when it was literally Baker McKenzie's office was 2 hotel rooms in the Beijing Hotel. And we were with the Chinese and helping them to develop their intellectual property laws, literally from scratch. So it's come a long way since then. But anyway, I digress. So yeah, spent a little bit of time, I think about 5 years in Hong Kong with Baker's. I met my wife there. So that was a pretty important and significant development. Had our first child there. And then decided to go in-house with Sun Microsystems, who's now part of Oracle. But at the time, they were a sort of relatively young company. They were a client of mine, and I was attracted to this idea of business and being closer to the business. So that's what got me into that space. And I went to start. In fact, we started our married life, Penny and I, by separating. She had a job in Hong Kong. It's one of those questions that people ask, tell me something interesting that no one would know about you. And that's what I say. I started our married life separated. I got on a plane, went to the States and worked in Silicon Valley there for a while with Sun as their international legal counsel, and managed to basically persuade my boss that it made more sense for me to be back in Hong Kong, which thankfully he agreed to. Otherwise, I may not be still married. But and then that was my first in-house role, setting up the Asia Pacific practice essentially, although I hate that word, the department in Hong Kong for Sun. and then worked there for a little while, and then had an opportunity to go to Europe, which as the European General Counsel for Sun Microsystems, which is where I met James. Actually, I was thinking, James, where we met, and we met, I don't know if you remember, by a pool in Athens before one of the ACC conferences. And as you say, we connected at that time and have done ever since for many of the reasons you mentioned. So anyway, I was working as European General Counsel for Sun for about 5-6 years. And then I wanted to get back to Australia for family reasons. So I went back and became their APAC legal counsel for a while, based out of Sydney. I had a second child. And then what happened? Oh, that's right. Then from there, my daughter actually had an illness that she was diagnosed with. And we decided then to make a move out of Australia, really from a life experience point of view. And I took a job with Citrix Systems, which is a US software company, and I was there, a European General Counsel based in Switzerland. And so that's where I moved to Switzerland and based in Zurich, working out of Schaffhausen. And I had about probably 6 or 7 years working there, which was a wonderful experience. And then from then, I was looking to come back to Australia in about about 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And I had the thought then of not wanting to go back and do another in-house gig. And that's when I decided to set up Alternatively Legal and to start doing what I love doing, which is really to challenge the traditional thinking in the legal profession and to help lawyers, particularly in-house lawyers, but also those in firms, to challenge their thinking and I call myself a guide, an independent guide, try to guide people down a different path. And that's what I've been doing for the last sort of 8 or 9 years, and culminating in the book that I've just published. That's the whistleblower tour.
I appreciate that. And also hearing a few insights that I hadn't heard before, including starting your married life separated. I wanted to make a quip about at least half of people also ending their married life separated, but it didn't seem appropriate. No, and for people listening or watching the meeting by the pool in Athens, lawyers work really hard. We do, honestly. And our conferences,
I
they
was
used to.
I was just going to say, and basically you just reinforced everything I believed about lawyers. Carry on.
No, I have to give a shout out to the Association of Corporate Counsel. Over the years, I became extremely jealous and guarded with my time. I would hardly ever do events outside because they were often not a good value for time or money. But the Association of Corporate Counsel, which is an association that caters to the in-house counsel profession, lawyers who work for companies, puts on an annual conference, one in the US, one in Europe. And this was the European annual conference that I found to be a good use of my time for good and various reasons. And they just happened to hold it in nice places. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I remember hearing at one of those conferences, maybe it was even the Athens conference, from an author that you and I both know, and maybe some of our listeners will know, Richard Susskind, who wrote a rather provocative book called The End of Lawyers. And in it, he was talking about how there were already then evident on the horizon technological changes. Seems quaint now looking back at the types of changes we were talking about compared to what we're facing today, that would have, in his view, a dramatic impact on how lawyers would provide services and, more importantly, how society would consume legal services and what implications that would have for lawyers. And I remember thinking, he might have even said this, but I remember thinking, boy, lawyers are so good at resisting change. We follow the same practices that we did 100 years ago. We love precedent. We bill people by the hour, for goodness sakes, and we love not to change. And I remember thinking, I don't care how significant the changes are coming from the outside. There's no way that lawyers are going to be early adopters of any of this stuff. You were probably there and hearing that same thing as I did, or if not, you certainly read the book, Peter. What's your view on how the world has played out in the last 20 years? On the one hand, my personal view is Mr. Susskind was entirely right, but he was also entirely wrong in predicting how quickly the change would happen. I think lawyers have still done a pretty good job of resisting change. Maybe you can comment on the impetus for sort of your thoughts on your business, and did it get prompted by Richard, or what was the origin of your thought process?
Yeah, that's a great question, James. There's a lot in your question. Let me just pick up on a few points there. So in general, I'll come back to Richard Susskind and his thoughts in a minute, but in general, and I mentioned this in my one of the chapters of the book, that I think it's called The Changing Landscape for Lawyers, where I go into all the changes that are happening at a macro kind of society level, but also in the legal industry. And what I say, that the sort of the takeaway point from that chapter is that, yes, there's been a lot of change. I mean, incredible amount of change, which, by the way, a lot of lawyers are not aware of. So I do these workshops with lawyers all over the world. And so probably in the last 9 years, I've been in front of more than 1,000, probably closer to 2,000 lawyers. So I get upfront and personal and really get to see it. And many of them, the vast majority, they're just simply not aware of a lot of this stuff because they're so busy working task-based, doing their stuff and then getting home and doing their personal thing. So that's one thing. It's a lack of awareness of a lot of this stuff, which for people like you and I, we know this, we keep, because we're interested in it and we have the time so that's part of the issue. It's a lack of an awareness a little bit of what's going on. And then the other thing, which is almost like this, I'm almost taking you through the gist of the book, which is that I think the problem is that a lot of people, so the people who do believe that lawyers need to change and bemoan the fact that they're not changing as much as they do, really only represent like a tiny percentage of, you think about the number of people on LinkedIn, it's probably that actively involved in discussions. It's maybe 1% of the entire legal population. So 99% of them just aren't thinking about this stuff. They aren't talking about it. And so therein lies a challenge as well. And I think I actually say that the problem is largely upon us, the so-called thought leaders and changes. We haven't done a good enough job of two things. And this is, by the way, classic change management thinking, is that we haven't done a good enough job of explaining the compelling reasons why lawyers should change. We always talk about the reasons for change from a sort of legal department or firm point of view, but we haven't done a good enough job of putting the reasons for change from the perspective of individual lawyers. And I tried to do that I think it's the second or third chapter of the book. I won't get into why, but that's one thing. The second thing I don't think we've done a good enough job of, which I've tried to do in the book, is to paint a clear picture of what the alternative might look like, the future vision. Because without doing that, of course, people are going to be reluctant to stop doing what they're doing and try something else. And by the way, they're just classic change management principles. You've just got to do that. If you don't do that, people won't change. So I think that would be my sort of general comments. And in short, yes, individuals, whilst there's been a lot of change in the industry, a lot of that change is relating to systems and processes. So yeah, but really humans, individuals haven't changed much. They haven't changed the work that they do or their capabilities to do new work. And I call that human transformation. So there's been very little human transformation, at least in the corporate legal industry space. There might have been maybe digital transformation, although I'm not so sure about that. But there certainly has been very little human transformation for the reasons that we mentioned. And then quickly, just to finish off on the Susskind point. So I mentioned him in the book, not so much The End of Lawyers, but more his most recent book, Tomorrow's Lawyers, and his other book, The Future of the Professions. And just one kind of quick grab from that, I would say, is that I agree with him to the extent that I think that the game is changing big time, more so now perhaps than, as you say, back then when he was talking about this stuff. But I think one of the things that I find, and I agree with him, is that I think the way lawyers and other professionals view things is that they believe they need to be the ones delivering the outcomes the clients want. And I think that's not necessarily true. I agree with him when he says that really lawyers currently provide those outcomes, but we should be looking at how can we deliver those outcomes to clients without lawyers necessarily being involved in that delivery process. So that's a thing we can get into later in the podcast, but I think I agree with him on that. But what I don't agree with him on, he's got a very pessimistic view, frankly, about the future of lawyers. I don't agree with that. I think I'm much more optimistic for reasons that I mentioned and we can talk about later. So it's a long answer to your question, but I hope I touched on some points there that are of interest.
Well, it was a compound question, as you rightly pointed out, and it left you lots of room for exploring what you did. So I have only myself to thank for that. But it was an interesting answer to that extent, and there's lots for us to follow up on. Maybe I could just take a sidebar for a moment and mention that Randy set up his own business and has been freelancing, what, 5 years now, 7 years, Randy, since you left
Seven.
the military. And he's a developmental book editor. And so it might be interesting just to hear, because I'm curious from your perspective, how was it writing this? You've actually just completed a second book related to the first and edited the first book and republished it. How easy or hard for you was the process of writing and publishing your book? Lawyers are pretty good with words, we're pretty good with writing. How was it for you writing and actually publishing a book?
I like, let
Typically,
me,
you have a better question to ask.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Let me add to that since I'm the expert here. So I get a lot of clients. I haven't got a lawyer yet, but I got a psychiatrist. I got a lot of businessmen wanting to write their books. And what I find is they don't know how to structure it so that it's readable. They just vomit on the page. These are all the ideas. And maybe sometimes they have way too many ideas of like, hey, this is 5 books, dude. Let's focus on the theme for this book. And let's see what the steps for that theme are and take everything else and put that in your next book. And so I usually have to focus them. And then I have to focus each chapter. And you said it sounds like you got either you had a really good editor that helped you out or you're very logically minded, because focusing one thing on the chapter and sticking with it is very important when I go through this too. And then having a really good introduction and really good conclusion. I'd really be interested in knowing from a published author what people helped you, copy editor, line editor, developmental editor, none of that. And then I assume you traditionally published or did you self-publish? That'd be.
No, great. Two good questions. Let me try and again, that's another complex question with lots of different things. Wow, you're really testing me this morning, guys, which is great. I love it. Okay, so let me just start perhaps answering James's question at sort of high level, and then we'll get into the more tactical kind of stuff. So I guess the answer to the question of how difficult, challenging it was ironically, in fact, I like to say this to people. They ask me how long did it take to write the book? And I say probably about 3 months. But I've spent almost 40 years thinking about this stuff and experimenting with stuff. I wasn't consciously doing with a view of writing a book, of course, at that point. But 40 years of that, I've spent at least the last 10 years translating a lot of things that work for me into theories and programs and frameworks and testing those out with those thousands of lawyers that I've in workshops all over the world. And I've had the benefit, at least for the last 9 years, of being able to do that full time. I haven't had another distraction with my job. So I've had time to think, reflect, and translate all that experience into sort of things. So when it came, and so these thoughts that have been coming around in my mind that I had refined and developed into programs, then really was quite relatively easy then to write the book. So that was an advantage that I had, and the structure was quite. Now moving into more the tactical side of things. So I had a pretty clear idea of how to structure this. And James, I'll let you comment on whether you think that's readable or not, or later, but because you've had a look at the book. But so then I spent the 3 months punching it out. I've been talking about the book for a long time. My wife constantly reminds me of that. She's relieved that we're nearing the end of this process. And it's been all consuming in that intense 3-month period, getting the stuff out. And then what I did, Randy, to answer your question, is I have some friends who are various, some are lawyers, some are, one of whom, for example, is the dean of the Rajasthan Asia Academy. And that's a firm in Asia that's got about 1,000 lawyers, 10 countries. And so I rolled out the T-shaped lawyer framework as the basis of the professional development program for all of their 1,000 lawyers. And we've spent the last 2 or 3 years doing that together. And so that's the subject of my second book that I haven't yet published. But so that goes into skills and mindsets and competencies and qualities and all that sort of stuff. And so she knows this stuff really well now, of course. And so she's been very kind to help me edit the books, and she and a few other people. So I've used a combination of cobble together friends and what have you to do that. And then what I've done in terms of the publishing, as James mentioned earlier, the first version of the first book, I actually published for free with Legal Business World. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they're out of the Netherlands. And I did that as an ebook for free, largely because I just wanted to get it out there. In fact, I talked to Patrick McKenna, who's an author, a US author. James, you may know Patrick in the US. He's written a lot of books, and I asked him for some advice on this. And he said, Peter, if you go with a traditional publisher, if you can find one who wants to publish a book, less than, and Randy, you can correct me on this, less than 5% of business authors sell more than, is it 500 or 5,000 copies? Anyway, it's not a lot.
500.
500, yeah.
And also you get a very small percentage of the actual money too.
Exactly, Randy. So I'm thinking, I want more people, way more than 500 to read this book. I think it's an important book. So I thought, look, let's just get the darn thing out there. And so I did that to start with. And then what happened, and the reason why I've rewritten the first book, in the process of writing the second book, it made me, because your thinking doesn't stop. You're constantly thinking and refining your thinking. And for example, I got into this whole thing about business, the business side of what lawyers do. In the second version of the first book, I've refined that idea and been a little more specific. And by the way, I think that there's a topic in itself we could talk about, the importance of being precise when it comes to the subject of change. And that's one of the reasons why I think we don't have a language for change. We're not precise enough about it. And that's a problem in itself. But let's just park that for now. Yeah, it just got me rethinking. And so I ended up rewriting the first book. Then I thought, with that, what I might do is I'll try self-publishing that, partly because I wanted to have more control over the price. So I've kept the price of the ebook quite low. It's less than, I think it's $9.99 or something in a US, the ebook, and have a paper book version of that because some people don't like ebooks. And I'm going to publish it on Kobo and Apple Books as well. So I've done a lot of that myself, and I've used Fiverr. People familiar with Fiverr and use that just to help a little bit with doing the cover of the book. My wife and I came up with the idea, and someone from Fiverr helped. I don't know if you've seen the cover. James, you probably have, but there it is. I'm on the back. Yeah.
We see it. We see it. It's nice.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's it. So again, long answer to your question, but hopefully that touched on most of the points.
You have stumbled, it sounds, on exactly what most self-published officers figured out over time and through talking to each other and going to different communities and stuff, which is you offered this one basically for free to get the interest. And then the follow-up book, which had a lot of the specifics, is what you're charging for, which is exactly what fiction authors do, especially if they have if you have the next guy who writes Jack Reacher, for instance, the idea is you have a teaser out there. Maybe it's only half a book. Maybe it's 30,000 words, not 60. And you have that out there, either it's for 99 or it's free you give it away to anyone who wants to read it. You market it just the same. And then they read it. Wow, this guy, I like this character. I like this plot. And then you start charging for your next one and you got them hooked, and then they read the series. So that's very interesting that you're a lawyer, you're a smart guy. So you figured it out on your own.
But you're right. I did stumble upon it, Randy. So I'd like to think that that was all part of a master plan, but it wasn't. It was pure.
The other problem we talked about, James and I talked about this on a different podcast, is most publishing companies are going to take 85% off the top for new authors, especially. Usually you can't even get in the door unless you have an agent who's going to take another 2% of the total, basically 10% of whatever you're going to get. And if they think it's a great idea and they give you an advance, you may never, ever get any royalties because you have to pay your advance out of that 15%, which never can, unless you sell 1 million books. The publishing company will make $1 million before you make $10,000 or something like that in some cases.
I'm familiar with that because I did take the idea to, I won't mention their name, but a pretty well-known publisher in the legal space. And they said they'd do it. They love to do it. And it would have been easier for me, frankly, because they would have done all the editing and what have you. But they wanted to charge a minimum of, I think it was £100. I don't know what that translated in US dollars, probably 130 US or thereabouts. And I thought, that's a lot of money. No one's going to buy my book at that price.
Lawyers are rich. All lawyers are rich. They can afford it.
I'm thinking, it was never about the money for me, and it still isn't about the money. It's about getting the message out there because I just think it's so darn important. Anyway, but it's been a fun learning process. Again, it's just fun to learn new things. So I'm learning about this whole business of book writing and publishing and trim sizes and and all this new language that I knew nothing about.
theme of Randy and my podcast here, we go back and forth between different ways to deliver the message, is that the title is Passionately Wrong. And we explore the ways in which people, despite the very best of intentions and tremendous enthusiasm, nonetheless make mistakes in the way they go through their lives and their professions. And so we're always alert to lessons learned and the takeaway from different stories. And for me, there's a couple in what you guys have been discussing here. Serendipity absolutely exists. Good luck and bad luck exist, but you can help bring the odds of luck in your favor by doing one of the things that you described doing, which was, hey, I know somebody, I'm going to talk to them, or I maybe don't know this person, but I'm going to reach out to them. And very often you will find people who are willing to share what they've learned over their many years of experience. So that's advice that we've given before, but which I would reiterate. You don't have to figure it out entirely on your own, and start with who you do know and then expand from there. And somebody might be able to give you a tip of somebody else who knows. If you have the right mindset about understanding that you don't know what you need to know, but others might be able to help you, that can bring you a long way, actually. So for all the budding authors who might be listening to us, you've probably got a whole bunch of tips and ideas just based on that short exchange between Peter and Randy. So that was good. Thanks, guys.
The other thing I'd say there about that, James, is that, this idea of stumbling upon things, in a way, that's one of the reasons that I do what I do and what I write the books, is because some people like you, I know, do figure it out how to practice, let's call it practice law in an effective way, to do their jobs in an effective way. But as you and I know, James, there are a lot that don't, and they struggle. And so one of the reasons I like to say I wrote the book and that I do my work is to shine a light on this sort of, I call it the dark art of practicing law. There are those that, and they're typically the ones who rise to senior positions in legal departments and firms. And it's not because of their legal excellence, or let's put it in non-lawyer terms, in their technical, professional. The thing that distinguishes those that are successful and those that are not is ironically something else. And in the case of a corporate lawyer, I believe it's the business side. It's this business ability to think like a business person, ability to act like one, and I call it do business work, provide business advice and input, and to do both internally within the legal department of them, but also for clients, for the business. And that's the point of distinction, I believe. And so that's why I'm trying to shine a light on what that is, because no one tells you that. There's no guidance on that stuff. And some people figure it out and others don't.
So there's one other thought that I had listening to you guys in the questions Randy was asking about the process of writing a book and of how to do it effectively. You were making a joke, Randy, that you thought maybe lawyers are organized. And Peter, you were saying, amongst other things, you drew upon decades of experience, which allowed you to take your substantive know-how and relatively quickly turn it into something. And I've read many nonfiction books, I like reading about business, and I could draw a distinction to business books that are written by journalists and business books that are written by participants. And they're both good, but for different reasons. And the journalists do a really good job using excellent writing and also storytelling. And I've learned to appreciate from Randy how helpful good storytelling is to making any kind of book to a reader and getting them to continue reading, in other words. Whereas books written by experts, and yours is clearly written by an expert, Peter, I can say that. It is super well organized. I think you do a great job keeping the chapters distinct. It's easy to follow. You use several vehicles, I think, that are conducive to, let's say, busy readers who want to get through it and keep going. You highlight important stuff, you summarize things. So it's a good and easy book to get through. But I could tell it wasn't written by a journalist because the storytelling element is in there a little bit, right? You start with a personal journey. It comes up a few times and you give experience from your own life and those of others, but it's not a narrative that runs throughout. And that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. And it would be something to consider depending upon how wide you wish your audience to be. Even lawyers like storytelling, right? John Grisham showed us it's possible to take a legal topic and turn it into an absolutely captivating thriller. So maybe for the benefit, Randy and I are familiar with the premise. You're obviously superbly familiar with the premise. Let's test you one more time and say, just give us the 2-minute snapshot of what the heck is a T-shaped professional or T-shaped lawyer? What is the concept here? And then we'll get into some details.
Okay, great. Good question. Thank you. And I agree, by the way, on the importance of storytelling. And it's true that certainly in the book, that's not something I've focused on. But yeah, the T-shaped professional. Okay. So most professionals, whether they're lawyers, HR people, accountants, whatever, have a skill set in one area. So in the lawyer's case, it's the law, legal knowledge, legal skills, but frankly, pretty limited skill set and experience beyond that core area of expertise. And you might say, well, so what? That's worked okay up until now. But I think the origins of the T-shaped professional idea, which came out, I think about, I want to say about 30 years ago or thereabouts, is the idea that increasingly it's important for professionals to develop some skill sets and capabilities and experience beyond that core area of expertise, not to the same depth, not to the same extent as your core area of expertise, but to a limited extent. And it's, as I say in the book, it's the other way to describe this simply is the expert generalist. So you don't want to be a generalist, but you don't want to be just an expert. You want to be an expert generalist. And in the case of lawyers, corporate lawyers, that is, I say the idea is to be a legal expert and a business generalist. So you want to develop some skills and some experience in the business space, because that allows you then to collaborate with your other functional colleagues from different functions more effectively to solve problems, complex problems. Because after all, companies don't have legal problems. They have, as I say in the book, they have business problems, and legal considerations are in some cases an important part of that, in some cases not. So if you want to contribute more often and to be able to add more value, then having this sort of breadth of experience and skills and the ability to contribute and to speak the language of all of other functions is going to help you to collaborate, to innovate for the organization as a whole, not just the legal department. So that's why I think T-shaped professional idea is so popular, increasingly popular amongst a range of professions, not just lawyers. Anyway, hopefully that answered the question.
So I can see a lot of applications in my military career to this, and some of them we talked on other podcasts, but when you apply this methodology or how you refer to it as, when you apply this to lawyers specifically, and probably other professions, I can probably see the benefits, but does it make you, I don't know, get promoted faster? Does it make you a better part of the team so the relationships are better? Because I can see where, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that because I'm a lawyer and this is my stovepipe and this is what I do. Obviously, people are like, that guy. And as opposed to, yeah, I'm going to give you my legal advice with my legal mind. I could probably think of some options for you, but it's not really my expertise. And then, hey, you're part of the team, you're helping out, so that you're more accepted. And will that give you more money or not? Or is it just going to make your work environment happier and a better place? How does that help the individual in the long run?
That's a great question, Reddy. You really honed in on that's the essence, really. That's the essence. The reason for doing it is because, and I know this from personal experience, because I'm not a journalist, as James said. I'm not just making this stuff because I read it in a book or whatever. This is how it was for me. And I stumbled upon it. I didn't have any guidance or book or anything to tell me to do this. It's just you naturally figure out that what really works is to be whatever team you might be a part of. James and I at a general counsel, we're dealing with the senior management level. You might be just supporting, I don't know, a HR function or a marketing group or whatever it is. But at whatever level you're interacting with people from the business. And what happens is that, those who just stick to legal advice, there's a certain value in that, in doing legal work and providing legal advice and things, but you can add to that value by, as you say, being part of a team, helping out. And we'll get back to there's boundaries around that you need to be mindful of. But you add more value, and therefore you become more valued. And so that's the way the cycle works. And everyone wants to be more valued. That's really one of the most important things of working in an organization, is to have that sense of people value what you do. And I quite often get lawyers tell me in these workshops that they say, look, we're doing all this incredible legal work, and the clients just don't get it. They don't appreciate what we do. And I say, that's an alarm bell. That's a red light, a flashing red light, that if you're saying that, it's not a question of convincing them that what you do is valuable. It's about changing what you do to do something they do perceive as being valuable, and hence the whole business work thing. So yeah, it's about, so what happens is you are more valued. You tend to get brought into conversations and situations earlier, which by the way, helps you to do your legal work more effectively, but also allows you to contribute more generally. And that's a lot more fun. It's a lot more interesting. You are more valued. And what tends to happen is, yeah, not necessarily directly as a result of that, but the way your clients perceive you is enhanced. And so therefore your prospects of, yeah, being promoted are greater than someone who just sticks to that legal lane or whatever that profession might be. So yeah, for all the reasons you mentioned, it worked for me, and I think it works for other people that I speak to. I'd be interested in James' comment on that, but that's my take on it.
No, you are organized also in your thinking, Peter, and you did answer Randy's question in a good substantive way, also coming to, I think, the correct conclusion. It will absolutely not only make your job more enjoyable, but make you more valuable to the company, which in turn, directly or indirectly, is going to lead to good things for you in your career. So I agree 100% with that conclusion. In a business, certainly in a public company, there is an intense emphasis on delivering shareholder value, and everyone who can contribute the more directly the better to that mission is going to be valuable to the business. And so there's the human factor, but there's just a principal practical factor that you can deliver value to the business in a way that they're measuring it. By God, they're gonna want to see you around more often. That thought, Peter, and also reading your book about how you came to see very early on how valuable it was for the business for lawyers to be thinking of the business and not just the law, happened because of your receiving an award from Sun Microsystems and from the business. And there's some comments you made about that at the time that showed, if I'm reading it correctly, that they valued you also for your non-legal contributions. And it really got you thinking early on in your career, hey, wait a minute, there is a significant value to understanding the business. I had a deeply cynical thought, but one that I have to mention, which is, hey, wait a minute. What if the business was manipulating us? Because I've had those conversations as well. Oh, it's so great, James. I forgot you were a lawyer. You're so helpful to the business. I'm like, I liked it at the time, just like you liked it. But what if they were manipulating us to say, I really don't like it, Peter, when you come and tell me a legal thing that I can't do. So I'm going to encourage you as much as possible to come around on this side of the table with me so that you forget your primary duty is over here to make sure there is a distinction between the role that a person who was hired primarily as a lawyer and a person who was hired primarily as a business person. And I always viewed it as a difference in our risk-taking attitude. Their job is to take risks, and the businesses to decide how much risks they're supposed to take. Someone has to be able to say, hey, hold on a minute, that's a risk too far. And if you're too much on the side of the table with the business, because they want you on that side naturally, of course they do, are you running the risk of dereliction of duty? And you addressed this, but maybe you could just briefly mention to me, are they just manipulating us for their own nefarious purposes when they tell
Look,
us it's good that you're on the business side?
yeah, it's a great question. It's one I get asked a lot, obviously. And I do address it in the book, as you mentioned, in some detail. But just to give you a quick kind of answer to that. Look, it might be that, and there are cases, of course, where lawyers do the wrong thing, and we read about those. They're the headline cases where everything's gone wrong. And the UK Post Office, we had one here, Star Casino in Australia, and you've had Enron and various other kind of things. But I actually say in those cases, and those cases, probably the business may well have tried to manipulate their lawyer, and their lawyer unfortunately fell for it. But that can happen whether you're doing what I'm suggesting or not. Whether you're business partnering or not, you can be manipulated into not calling out something that you should have called out. So I don't think it makes a difference from that point of view. But for the vast majority of situations, no, it's not the business trying to manipulate you. It's you trying to get in there and get involved and being more integrated and giving yourself the chance to see things earlier on, that problems that might arise. And you have an opportunity, as I say, if you've got a strong business partnering relationship with your business colleagues, then what happens in practice, and I'm sure you'll know this, James, is occasionally, you don't have to do it very often unless you're working in a company that is really morally off the scales. Most companies try to do the right thing. And if you have to push back sometimes, if you've got a strong relationship that's more than just the lawyer, then you are able to push back. And the relationship is strong enough to withstand that because they know that you provide sound input and they value that relationship. And so you can do it. And of course, you can do it in different ways. It's not always a case of saying, no, you can't do this. You come up with other alternative ways to do things and things. Yeah, I think a risk with anything. And obviously the safest thing to do is stick within your narrow legal lane. But I say the risk of not doing what I'm suggesting is greater in the sense that you're missing out on the opportunity to add more value, to be more value, to get more involved. And then we haven't even talked about the future and why this is so important. From if you then layer on top of all this, what's happening with GAI, generative artificial intelligence and other things, it's pretty clear back to Susskind that I think he calls it increasingly capable machines are encroaching on the tasks that professionals do. And I think that's right. That's clearly right. You need to be thinking, I think, all professionals, but let's just stick with lawyers for a minute about, okay, if that's true, and if that is likely to continue, in fact, perhaps increasingly so, what other things might professionals, what lawyers might be able to do? And that's what I've tried to tease out in the book and in the work, that there is a lot more that lawyers can do. And that is this business work, business input and advice.
I agree with you that the message is also quite optimistic, Peter. And I also often observed that lawyers can be a tremendous asset to many business situations because we do have good judgment. We're really good at analyzing situations. We can take the big picture perspective. And if we're willing to bring that to the areas where we've gained expertise and experience, we really can add a tremendous amount of value. So from that perspective, the change and the technological transformation doesn't have to lead to scary or bad human transformation. It's actually, as you point out, I think a really positive message. Brandy, did you want to add something or ask a question there? Otherwise, I have another one.
I don't have any more questions. That's some military comparisons if we have time, but go ahead, James.
No, I'm glad you raised it before because I remember something that you were saying before about the characteristics of people on. Randy was in the special forces. He served as a Green Beret and a Ranger. And you were describing to me some of the attributes of people who were valued by those teams. And it was very much the person who had a competence, maybe in one area, but had the T-shaped willingness to take on other capabilities. And it's a bit of skill and attitude. It was both things. The willingness to go and say, yeah, I may not be the best at that, but I'm happy to help out and I'll do what I can in this circumstance. So I was remembering that story that you were telling earlier when Peter was talking as well, Randy. We'll see if you can add more color to it. I want to challenge Peter just a wee bit more if I can strain his patience. And that would be to say, and I will give you the chance to talk more about the digital transformation and the human transformation that you think is possible as a result. But one thing that I've observed in my thinking and writing is also on this issue of human nature and how it's changed or not changed. And I go even farther back. I go back to basic human character and what became a really useful tool to me in my legal work, which was trying to understand the incentives. What are the incentives in this situation? If we've designed the incentives poorly, people are going to behave badly. You, for a couple of years in your career, I think were responsible for a global compliance program. Why do companies have compliance programs? It's because no matter how obvious and clear the laws are, people are sometimes going to have a mismatch of incentives and think, oh, I can get the business this way, even if it's illegal. Well, by God, it's worth it to me to go pay this bribe or whatever the obvious illegal or wrong thing is. People do that, right? If the incentives are misaligned. So my question to you, Peter, is if a lawyer embraces the idea that they shall add value to the business, obviously now their incentives start to change because they're incentivized in a very similar way as the business is to see that we get new customers, see that we get the deal. It's possible that the very basic human nature of wanting to achieve what it is we set out to do, that by changing the incentives, we're also going to change some of the way that the lawyer thinks about their role. If my role is risk management, I behave a certain way. If my role is landing the deal, I behave a very different way. And it's either you have your foot in both camps and you're not really effective in either, or you put your foot fully in the one camp and then you're not effective at the other role. So I think you, to my very, in this case, critical eye, you brushed past too quickly the role that human incentives play in the role that lawyers play in an organization. So I'm springing that on you, but what do you think?
Yeah.
You probably heard it before as well.
No, I haven't actually. That's the first time someone's raised that, but I like it. It's a great question. And you're absolutely right. Incentives do drive behavior. Yeah, but maybe I think what I would say to that, just thinking off the top of my head, is that, so firstly, it all depends on what does adding value mean in the context of a corporate lawyer. I do not suggest that means tie your comp, get a bonus tied to sales. So it's not that. It's something a little more subtle than that. And I haven't thought all this through, to be honest, in specific terms. But what it would mean would be that, so I think of adding value from a corporate lawyer's point of view, and I think I point this out in the book. It's never adding value is adding value from in an objective sense, from the point of view of the company, which is essentially it's the senior management, but it's reflected in what the company does. And I say it's never in the interest of the company objectively to do something that might in the short term, bring some revenue, but in the long run, as you and I know, whenever anyone does the wrong thing, first of all, it always gets found out. And then there's the cover up. And then it's actually the damage that gets done by that will always outweigh objectively any short-term benefit from doing a deal or paying a bribe or whatever. So I think it is possible for corporate to rationalize this sense of what is adding value in a way that is consistent with lawyers doing the right thing and calling out things that are illegal or unethical. So I think it is possible to do that. They're not mutually inconsistent. So that's just off the top of my head. I believe that to be true. And I know that from my own personal experience that I never had that situation. And when I challenge people in workshops, virtually no one comes up with a situation where that really, in fact, in theory, it could be an issue, but in practice, it rarely is.
Yes, but the fact remains, we have compliance programs in every company of every size. And the reason we have them is because incentives drive behavior, and the short term versus long term is 100% correct. And if lawyers haven't experienced it in the past, I'd say it's because their incentives have been properly aligned. So this gets me to, and I like your answer. It's a good answer. And I think it's the right way to think of this topic. It leads me to make a suggestion. You may have covered this in your book, but the next one, the how part, which would be, I was wanting to know as a senior lawyer, if I was thinking about how to communicate this and structure my team, I would want to know, who do my lawyers report to and how do I design their incentives? How do I set their targets so as to achieve both the business alignment, but also my legal objectives? Those are really important questions. Randy, when we send lawyers around the world to support the units, sometimes you hear people talk about, is that lawyer going to go native? And go native means they're going to get so close to the local management team that they no longer serve as an independent risk management function because they're too close to the business. I don't know if you ever heard that term, and it's probably inappropriate to even use it today. Sorry. But that's how you refer to it.
I think it's very appropriate to the military, though, because they assign lawyers to the units, and inevitably the commander is writing the evaluation report for the lawyer who falls under him. Hey, I want to do this, and I want to do it now.
Yeah, no, that's great. Go ahead.
No, I think you're right that those risks can be managed, but it's probably good to explicitly address, okay, listen, here's how we can think about the reporting issue. Here's how we can think about the compensation issue, as to make sure that you don't inadvertently create an incentive for people to be put in a situation where it's not necessary. And you can still get what you want, but there's these one or two pitfalls along the way, I suspect.
Thank you. No, that's a great point, James. I appreciate you pointing that out. Thank you.
So let's go ahead.
I have an idea for your next book. So it only works is, did you invent the term T-shaped, or has this been applied by another, I never read a book that said T-shaped, but it makes sense. And so has other people written the T-shaped doctor or the T-shaped maker or whatever?
Yeah, they definitely have. No, I didn't invent the T-shaped concept. As I said, it was 30, 40 years ago. Someone came up with it and has been applying it to other professions. I was, if not the first, one of the first to apply the T-shaped professional concept to lawyers. I did that probably 9 years ago. And because it just gelled with, it was a nice, easy metaphor and concept to capture the kind of work that I was doing anyway. In fact, my first program was called Everything But the Law. That was the name of the program. But then this T-shaped thing really resonated. And I thought, yeah, that's it. So no, I didn't come up with the concept, the T-shaped professional concept.
But when I think of the military and I think of a commander, the T-shaped manager would be the next title of the book I would think of, because you're managing for productivity, you're managing whatever, but you have all of these extra people like lawyers and maybe in the case of the military, you have a chaplain, and you have all these other people that can help you. They were assigned to your unit to help you because someone thought they would be useful in some way. And are you using them to their best success? And I'll give you an example of, like, for instance, the invasion of Afghanistan, right? the president's, hey, how are we going to do this? And if you don't bring the tank guys and the infantry guys and the special operations guys if you don't bring all these guys into the same room and say, throw your ideas on the wall and see what sticks, and you just say, hey, my friend, General so-and-so, and he was a tank guy his whole career, is like, how do you think we should do this? We should get on the border of Pakistan and charge with our tanks. And I'm sure there was a lot of great ideas, but ultimately the special operations guys, hey, I think we can do this with 100 guys and like 8 helicopters. And what? We don't have to cause a war and kill millions of people. Not in the first day anyway, 20 years later maybe, but we didn't know it would be that long. But things like that, where how are we going to take this building down? Well, the infantry guys are going to go through the door. The tank's just going to bust the whole wall down. And the Green Beret is going to put a little charge, put a hole in the wall, surprise them, and take them all up prisoner. And which way do we want to do this? So the T-shaped manager would be, hey, making sure that you have an open mind, you ask open-ended questions, and to guiding the guys away from their specialties so that they are able to enable all their knowledge on the table and move forward. There you go. You're welcome.
No, great. Thank you. It's funny you say that because, Randy, so one thing I've realized, and this is something I incorporated into my programs and workshops from a long time ago, is the fact that you have to do this at different levels. So there's the individual level. If you're talking about change, transformation, you have to do it at an individual level. You have to do it at a team level. And ideally, those things should be aligned, which again is another reason why I believe this T-shaped thing is quite attractive, because you can do it at a individual, which is what my book, this first book and the second book is really focused on, primarily individuals. But I also have a thing called the T-shaped team framework, which is for legal departments. And that's aligned, but different, because a team, as James knows, as someone who's managed a team, and you're looking at kind of things like hiring and professional development of the team and, what work you should be doing as a team and not doing. And so there's a whole dimension to that we haven't even got into, but you need to have that. And ideally that should be aligned. I've got a thing called the T-shaped firm framework, which is really for law firms. I didn't mention that in my sort of career thing that I'd spent some time here in Australia. I'm helping KPMG develop their so-called new law business, an alternative legal service provider business, which is essentially, again, not surprisingly, it's adding on not just providing legal services to clients, but helping legal departments solve their business problems. And that's essentially what we did with KPMG. And we set that up from scratch. And now that's a big business globally that they do. Yeah, there's you can think about this at different levels, and you need to think about it at different levels for it to really work and to really achieve significant change.
If I understood Randy correctly, you were, and if I hear you correctly, Peter, you're saying there's the individual, there's the team of professionals in which that individual is working, and you can talk about these concepts at both of those levels. I think Randy's talking about yet another level, which is I'm a manager of a whole organization. I'm the CEO, I'm the board. How do I make sure that my general managers get the most out of all of their specialist functions? So it's yet a third level marrying up how does a general manager make the best use of their experts they'll be at different stages of maturity. So it's not that you need to have a third book in the pipeline, but I suspect that would have pretty broad interest. How do you get the best out of your many experts who are going through these?
The T-shaped organization. Yeah, that's right.
There you go.
Well done, Randy.
You can use military examples, and I can give you stories.
And you can help with the editing, can you? As I understand it.
I don't know if I can. I don't know if I guess the Australian spelling is very similar to the British, so I'm not really great at that. I'll notice when it's different, but I won't be able to tell you when it's correct.
Peter, probably at that conference all those years ago in Athens, you and I heard or even participated in a presentation on soft skills that lawyers should have to expand their professional capabilities. And human skills, however you want to refer to it. I guess that question probably still comes up. How do you feel about that question? Is that relevant to this whole discussion? Is that what you're talking about, or is that something different?
No, it's a great question. It's absolutely relevant, James. Thanks for raising it, actually. So a couple of ways to answer that question. Yeah, it gets asked a lot. You and I are on LinkedIn and we see it all the time. People are saying, so what new skills do lawyers need? And everyone speculates as to Someone says design thinking. Someone says it's all about empathy. And I'd have a chuckle to myself because for two reasons. One is you can't possibly answer that question until you answer the first question, which is, what are you going to use them for? And that's why I did the two books. I was initially going to do it as one big book, but I realized that you've got to start with figuring out what's your vision, what are you trying to achieve, and what work are you planning to do. And once you do, that will then inform what new skills you need. So, for example, if you use the T-shaped lawyer idea, if you want to just be an I-shaped lawyer, then you don't actually need to learn design thinking or process improvement or these sorts of things. No, you don't. But if you want to be a T-shaped lawyer or you want to be a legal ops person, then yeah, these skills, these different skills and things become more relevant. And by the way, it's not just skills. Everyone's focused on skills. Skills get used, that term gets used a lot to describe all sorts of things. So yeah, the expression human skills, there really isn't a human skill. Human skills are qualities. And these are the distinctions that I get into in the second book, the distinction between skills, competencies, qualities, mindsets, knowledge, and how there are very specific things that are relevant if you want to be a T-shaped lawyer. So that's literally what the second book is about, the how. And the how is I call it the generic term is capabilities. How can you expand your capabilities through these different things? So yes, the answer is the lawyers clearly, if you want to be a T-shaped lawyer, then you need to develop capabilities beyond legal skills and you need to develop knowledge beyond knowledge of the law. And I get into that in great detail in the second book, which I hope to publish later this year, early next, if I can stop spending time on the first book and promoting it a little bit.
I said at the beginning that, and it's a stereotype, lawyers are resistant to change. It's a good stereotype, but it's absolutely incorrect when you look at how varied and diverse the legal field is. And as you were discussing it, and I was thinking about what you're saying, we're on LinkedIn, we see these posts. There's actually a tremendous number of lawyers who are desperately thinking about how do I improve? How do I stay relevant? How do I get better? And these are smart, analytical people. Actually, the fact that these questions are coming up and are being asked in these roundabout ways suggests that there's a hunger and a need for good information and guidance on this. I don't know of a lot of really specific guidance, Peter. So I hope your second book, as well as the first, continues to reach eager minds. There are many of them who are not just not resistant to change, but actively looking for guidance on how to do it. I did also have to laugh at your very good answer to the question, what skills do I need? It made me think on the military side, if we were to go and ask the military, what weapons do you need? They should
Yes.
also naturally ask the question, what do you want me to do with them?
Totally.
And then I'll answer the question. So it makes sense to me. Yes. All right. So we have, I think, covered the main topics that we had on our side, but I know you had a bunch of things probably on your side. So if Randy and I have missed asking you about something that's really important, Peter, this is the chance for you to say, all right, I'd like to raise this issue or that issue. What else have we not covered that you'd like to leave for listeners?
Thanks, James. So it's been great. I think it's been a free-flowing conversation. We have covered, I think, pretty much everything. Perhaps as a final thought, I think what I feel that everyone, even people who are, as you say, those on LinkedIn and stuff who are actively interested in this and looking for guidance and help and things, I think the one thought I think that's really important is to think about what are you trying to achieve? And this is why I talk about vision. People often think vision, that sounds a bit fluffy and unnecessary. And as a little aside, I have this conversation with managing partners of firms and GCs. And I ask them, I say, have you got a vision? What's your vision for your firm or your legal department? And half the time they don't have one. They don't even know what a vision is. They confuse vision with mission. And anyway, without getting into all that, but the long and short of it is that to me, you've got to have a sense of, your purpose, that's mission. What do you think you should be doing? And then a vision, a sense of where you're trying to get to. What's your aspiration? And that's so critical as a sort of a starting point, because that makes you think about what actually are you trying to achieve? And then you can do that again at an individual level, and you can and should do it at a team level. And because once you get clarity around that, it then helps to inform so many of the other things, the changes you should make, the technology you should use, how you should use it, the professional development, all the strategies and things flow from that, goals, at least they should. And so I think that's one very important thing to do, as I say, both at an individual and team level. And secondly, the second thought is really final thought is that I touched on it earlier, this importance of being precise. I wrote an article for ACC Docket. I don't know if you saw that, James, but which was on this very topic, and how it's ironic that lawyers who are so precise, pedantic to the nth point when it comes to the law itself, contracts and legal advice and stuff, are so imprecise when it comes to the language of change. They use business partner and transformation and innovation and all these sorts of words so loosely that it's sort of lost meaning. And you might say, well, so what? But actually it matters a lot. Just as the legal language you use in a contract matters, so does the language you use in change. Because if you're not precise about these things, and I'm trying to help, we're coming up with some terminology that people can use in the books, then what happens is you think that you're doing something, innovating or transforming, and you're not. And you're kidding yourself. And so you're not going to therefore achieve your objectives without being really precise. So that's the final thought that I would leave people with, is to, again, my books will help to give you a point of view about what those terms should mean. So that's why, for example, with the business work stuff, I might try to dig into a little bit more about the distinction between internal business work and client business work and business partnering and business leadership, and just to try and be a bit more specific about that. So that's an important thing, I think, for anyone who's looking, whether they're lawyers or not, looking to change. And particularly if you're looking to transform, that is to be something completely different.
So I could see different levels of appetite amongst lawyers, depending upon where they are in their firm and in their professional journey, for change, for incremental change, for transformational change. One of the reasons lawyers might be interested in change, we've talked about technology in the external world changing around us, but one of the other very valid reasons is lawyers do a lot of stuff that they wish they didn't have to do or could find a way not to do. It's not just that we're afraid of things being taken away from us. By God, a lot of lawyers will welcome many things being taken away from them. You tell me I don't have to review 40,000 contracts this year? Why, thank you. I'll find that a very welcome change. But what I like about your emphasis on using a vision as a way to help you make the changes that you're prepared and willing to make is that a vision done correctly does two high-level things for you and for your organization. It not only outlines where you wish to go, it also outlines the things that are not in your vision, and therefore that you have to find a way not to do. And that's the very attractive side of this. I don't have to do this, this, and this. Why, sign me up, Peter, or tell me how I can help work towards that very attractive vision. I think that's probably a good way to say, listen, there's disruption in all of this that we're talking about, but there's quite a few upsides for the individual and the team that manages to see this from a constructive way and say, hey, if we do this right, we're going to make our lives better. We're going to be tremendously more valuable to the business. We're going to make our business tremendously more valuable. And that's worth managing through some of the potential risks and obstacles that we talked about over the course of the discussion. I like it. It's a good discussion. And I'm very happy from my side just to know that you're there helping the in-house legal community, and not just the in-house legal community, lawyers in general, see this from a different way. I think it's a good thing you're doing, Peter. The more we can do to enhance lawyers' reputation and make them successful, the better society is as well. Randy, I hope this also has some broader application, as we talked about a few times, and we'll see what sort of reaction we get from listeners.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it, James. Thanks so much. Thanks, Randy.
Yep. Thank you.
We'd love to hear what you think, so please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.